Identify and book the world's best speakers for your next event. MENA Speakers is the leading speakers and MC bureau in the Middle East. We bring global talent to the region and have established the region as a key global hub for speakers. Inspire and motivate your audience. Find exactly what you are looking for by working closely with us to assist you in understanding the cost-benefit analysis tied to selecting a speaker for any event. Ensure that your audience is educated, engaged, and empowered. Connect with us for a quick response and tailored advice. Book your speakers now.
Do you have an all-star HR team? You may feel your team is already performing at a high level, but let's take a closer look. Would your company's top leaders and employees agree that your HR team are operating at a high level? Are team members able to influence top executives on difficult topics? Are team members business and strategy focused on the challenges the organization is facing? Does the executive team trust your direct reports as advisors on human capital issues? If you can answer yes to these questions, you have built an outstanding team. If you feel there is room for improvement, Strategy Focused Group can create a custom development program to elevate the quality of your HR team. We use HCI certification programs as well as non-certified HRBP MBA Masterclass to give your team a laser focus on the business and strategy. Please email us at info@strategyfocusedgroup.com.
Good morning, good evening, depending upon what part of the world you're in. If it's Friday, it is the CEO series, where we bring together global leaders, entrepreneurs, innovators, and disruptors. And our disruptor and innovator today is Charlotte Chedeville, who's the acting regional director of CIPD representing the MENA region. She's responsible for growing CIPD's footprint in the region by engaging with the people community and ensuring effective development and implementation for L&D solutions for employers as well as the HR department. Prior to joining CIPD in 2018, she was the PR, social impact, and project lead of the Global Women in Leadership Economic Forum. And with that, I'd like to welcome Charlotte. Hey, how are you?
Good morning, your side of the world, Ron. I'm very good. Thank you for having me. Hello from Dubai.
So glad to have you from Dubai, 5 p.m, and you made the time for us. So I wanted to talk to you about the so-called future of work. Companies are struggling, whether it's work from home, work from anywhere, the hybrid model, and they're trying to figure out what's going to work. So it's kind of like a blank slate. Can you give us some insight from your side as you sit on top of the pyramid and you talk to leaders across the globe? What advice would you offer them as it relates to this new dynamic that they've probably never faced before?
Yeah, so first of all, for those who may not have the context, the CIPD is the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development. We're the professional body for HR, so we qualify over 200,000 professionals around the world, and my perspective is mainly working with the MENA region. Even though what we are seeing, like what you're saying, Ron, is we're seeing that the challenges are the same all around the world. The trends are the same. What may differ is that some regions may be a little bit ahead or a little bit behind, and the way in which we address these challenges will be different. So now, I guess the pandemic's really kind of been that big earthquake, not just for organizations, but in particular for the people profession, right? It's put in previous crises, we've seen CFOs being at the forefront of these crises. This time around, it was CHROs I was in driving seat, right? And you're talking now, rightly so, jumping into flexible working, but that was the big thing. It was all about people this time. And it was people when we realized that we had to find ways to get them to work in a different setup than what we were used to, or our businesses would fail. And I think that's really been a huge paradigm shift in how people are perceived within the organization, how we understand their contribution and them as an asset, but particularly for people professionals. Really, I think that's been a big driver. Now, what we're seeing is one of the first thing that you're talking about right now. Of course, we've all had to have this big work from home experiment. And countless studies now, we didn't know that at the time. We all tried to navigate it as best as we could, but we had no choice. And because we had no choice, we made it work. There were many questions prior to the crisis around trust. Do we really want people to work from home? How do I know how to manage the performance if I can't see them? Well, them being forced to work from home just completely erased that and forced us all to take that leap of faith. And what I think is interesting is looking forward after this. Now we're 2 years into that. We've seen that it worked. Countless studies shows us that we've seen greater performance overall as businesses. Businesses haven't gone down because of people working from home. If they have, it was because of production issue or supply chains being disrupted, like we're seeing now with Ukraine, not because people were working from home. We've seen, mental health become a big issue, something that's become the forefront of organizations, but also I think what's really kept CHROs up at night, how they look after my people. And so with all the lessons that we've learned, taking them forward, now we're hearing the huge debate around hybrid working, and you kind of have two trends, right? All of the forward-looking companies, which is what we really advocate for, build on what you've learned and continue to offer flexible working and never go for one-size-fits-all solutions. At the same time, you have so many organizations, and we can't discount that, who said, yeah, right, that kind of worked. But now we've got the offices back, and this is how we're going to build our culture. And we want everyone to be consistent, and we want fairness. And so we don't really want to build upon what we've learned. We're in a rush to bring people in the office. And again, that doesn't work for everybody, but I guess that's the point, is how do you make this hybrid work? In the region, we're seeing a big drive for people returning to the office from an employer's side, but we're seeing employees, and I'm one of them, right, saying, wait, if you want me in the office 5 days a week, 9 to 6, I may look outside. Exactly. It's not about the money. I may actually want to look at another employer and how they're looking at what they're offering me and work-life balance. I'm not going back. We're not going back. And why would we? I hope that kind of gives us some food for thought for the rest of the discussion.
It does. You gave me so many nuggets to follow up on. So I want to follow up on the last comment you made. If somebody says, I want you back 5 days a week, I'm going to look someplace else, because a global head of talent acquisition told me that whenever he sees one of his competitors comes back with one of these rigid old school rules of I need you in the office 2-3 days a week, his team focuses on people with the skills they need inside of that organization. So it's now become kind of a competitive advantage, because am I offering a flexibility, or do I want to go back to an era, as you said, the earthquake kind of disrupted everything. And now we've got to think in a new realm. And that new realm is saying that it's a competitive advantage now if you're offering flexibility.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point you're making around. A big thing that we've talked about just before this discussion is the seismic shift that's happened in the employee-employer relationship. First, as a result of COVID, because we've had to look at trust, we've had to empower employees, we've had to renegotiate our contract. I mean, work was at home and home was work. And then we're seeing it now going forward, right? Now you're saying that we're in a very, very fast changing market. So I have to be careful, right? There's the market became very, very strong before the Russia-Ukraine war. It's then taken a hit again with a lot of supply chain issues. So it's constantly changing. But what we are seeing is the power has changed and is now really in the hands of the employees as far as top talent is concerned, and as far as being a big employer of choice is concerned. So what I'm seeing right now, and we had a CIPD members event in Dubai yesterday, right? So we had leaders from Mubadala, from DP World, from PepsiCo, from Hilton, from all industries alike, saying right now the hot talk of the town is, what do we do with our employee value proposition? Yeah. So you're still thinking of, well, maybe we're not always going to be in a situation where we can just look at salary and compensation, but we know from experience and studies that throwing money at people only goes a certain way. So either way, you're going to have to go and look at How do you offer mental health support and well-being? How do
Yes.
you offer growth opportunities? How do you offer internal mobility? Because people want to travel around. The world's opened up again, right? So can I work from home in a different country? Can I move around if you're a multinational? And what some of the leaders were telling us yesterday, they said, now we're seeing these candidates coming through the door, even young talent. They're interviewing you and they want to know what you're offering. And that has to be at the forefront of our discussion and our thinking, right?
So I this is the way I put it. The pendulum has swung. The employees drive it now. At one time, the organization was in charge. We did what we wanted. We, as the org, we did what we wanted to do, and we kind of dictated. That doesn't happen anymore because that new level of talent is coming in, and they're saying, "This is what I want," and I'm interviewing you for the right to have me come to work for you. So, how would you advise a mindset shift for an organization to rethink our value proposition? So, because we've always maybe have been the big brand name and we can pretty much do what we want, but we see what happened with Apple. They said, we want you back 3 days a week. And people said, we're not going to do that. It's not happening. Absolutely. How would you advise a C-suite that we've got to rethink everything? The earthquake is disrupted. And we've got to go back to the drawing boards and basically start from scratch.
The first point is really to remember that businesses are made by people for people. Your customers are people and your employees are people. And without having that at the forefront of our mindsets, we're risking to fail. No amount of strategy or business planning can cover up for our people. The people profession has said this for a long time, but I mean, it's kind of, preaching for our own choir. But looking at businesses, we know that. And it's not just in the service industry. The second thing is you're talking now about the brand and before we go into the employer brand, simply brands, right? One of the key trends that we've identified for the future of work as we looked at the people profession 2030 was the importance of corporate responsibility, the importance of sustainability. So people now, and we're talking customers and employees, people want to see that the businesses are doing good. And because of this, and they're looking after the people and they're looking for the environment, and it's not just a new talent. As a customer, I no longer want to buy from a company that is not being ethical, right? And we're in such fast changing market. Today's Apple can be tomorrow's Nokia. The brands are made and broken so fast. Everybody has a voice, whether you're secretary, whether you're CEO, your first-time customer or your long-time loyal customer, they're all on social media. Mm-hmm. Anything can become viral. The world has become such a smaller place and people will go where they want to go. Mm-hmm. So I think bringing back to the parallel between employee experience and customer experience, any single business leader will look at their output. Who's buying from you, your customers? Yeah. How are we delighting your customers? I'm sure that's a conversation you're having with the C-suite all the time, right? How are we providing better services? How we're reducing our delivery times? How are we having processes that enable us to be responsive and agile? The same mindset that we apply to customers is the same mindset we want to apply to employees. Your employees are your customers, but your employees are also the ones who are doing everything for you. And I think it sounds really, really simple. I think the importance of people management is to a large extent adopted. What isn't is it's not yet completely trickled down to an employee value proposition. I think far too many employers still see the employee-employee relationship as a fully transactional relationship that they own. And if it is a transactional relationship, you just said it right. If it is a transactional relationship, good and well. If you're my employer, I'm your employee, I'm working for you, you're paying me. But that's not just all I want. I'm working for you. I'm giving you ideas. I'm giving you support. I'm opening your network. I'm putting all my skills that way. In return, what are you offering me? I need more than just money. And if you think about it from a business perspective, all of the different elements of the employee value proposition, everything that makes an employer brand is actually not the most expensive stuff. It's the stuff that we have to think about. You look at employee well-being, you look at flexibility. If you can't offer your employees a raise, what else can you do? What do you already have? Right. Maybe you already have international offices. You already have great facilities that may be just for your senior leaders. How are we trickling them down? you already have provisions for maternity leave or paternity leave. How can we adapt them so they're not just for that time? How can we make sure that we're looking at employees throughout their life cycle and not just at certain times of their life? So I think it's really what we have to think about. And the second thing is, as we're having this discussion, yesterday we're having a discussion about the future of work. And at the end, we're wondering, are we going to have that discussion again in 18 months? And there were different views around that. And I think my view is similar to what I've heard yesterday. Yes, we will. And we will have different answers because it will continue to evolve. So as much as business planning is important, we also have to understand and respond to this new rhythm, to this new pace. I don't think today, Ron, you could sit down and have a plan for the next 10 years for your business. That's not going to work.
Not even to be thought of. But what you said was so important. Will we have this conversation 3-5 years ago? Well, my thought is yes, you will have it because the entire employee journey is evolving. And if we don't pulse to see what our people are feeling on the other side, and you use the analogy of customers, employees, that's not a hard concept to understand. It's not a hard concept to understand. If your customers were yearning for something, if your customers were yearning for a deeper relationship, we would figure that out. From marketing, from IT, or whatever business we would be in, we would figure it out. So my thought has always been, treat your employees the same way you would treat your best customers. Because if you do that right, it trickles down to the customer. There's a American hospital in Dubai. CEO Peter Mikowski, very, very dear friend of mine. This goes back a while. And his thought was this: as a leader, I take care of the people who take care of the people. In other words, if I take care of the doctors, nurses, and everyone inside of the hospital, they will in turn translate that back to the patients, the people that even cut the lawn, park the cars, and all of that. And I've always said that is a perfect metaphor.
Yeah, I think you're making an interesting point. Very often I hear from HR professionals, great, I want to hear what the others in my industry are doing.
Yeah.
I think in a way that's limiting, not just for HR, for business, for marketing. I think marketing has a lot to learn from how B2C or retail brands are marketing to the customers, even if I'm a big consultancy house, right? And the same goes for people management. So I think maybe your industry isn't the best in class. But what are the industries? And then there are always exceptions, and there are always, market leaders in every industry. But what are the ones who are usually thinking this way, where that thinking has happened a long time ago? It's what you're saying. It's a service industry. It's a healthcare industry where you're looking after patients. It's a doctor-patient relationship. It's it's the hospitality industry where we know the difference between a 5-star hotel and a 2-star hotel, and a great 5-star hotel and a terrible 5-star hotel isn't the lobby or the coffee. It's customer service, right? Yeah. It's true for banking. We all have our frustrations and our experiences with banking. So there are a number of sectors that have understood this a long time ago. Not saying that all companies in the sectors are doing well, but I would encourage companies and people to look outside of their own sector and see where can be the lessons learned.
One of the key thoughts always comes to me, and specifically in the Middle East, as well as Asia too. Everybody wants to know best practices, and you kind of nailed it exactly what you're talking about. Best practices work at that company. The DNA is different. The customer profile is different. The line of business and you're different. It's okay to use that as an anchor, but my thought has always been, ask the people inside of your organization. You've got 1,500 employees. What are they thinking? Because the solution from XYZ company may not scale to my organization. So can we build a better listening strategy? How do we listen going into this new realm? I love the metaphor you use, the earthquake. It just threw everything out, and we've got to kind of put it back together again. But that requires listening to the most important asset that is called. How would you guide an organization post-COVID, if there is such a thing, to listen better, to listen to our employees better?
The first thing is I want to give you an example that was given to me a while ago that really illustrates that, right? So I remember talking to the CHRO of a very, very, very large companies building aircrafts and all sorts of engineering. they had an issue with a plane that they had planned to build, and they just couldn't sort in engineering issues. They went out and spent so much money on trying to find someone externally, trying to find the best engineers, trying to find the best structure, trying to find the best solution. All that cost money and time and delayed all of their delivery to the customers. And eventually, they decided, let's just look internally. So what they did is they did a call internally. I think it was GE. They went internally and they put a call not to their best engineering team, they put a call to anybody in the organization internally. They said, hey, here's the math equation that we've got to solve. Anybody. And they found the solution coming from somebody completely outside of their engineering department, completely remote geographically, that had the idea. And I think that speaks to two things. That speaks to, one, the people within your organization. And we know that hiring and promoting internally, when it comes to workforce planning, we know that succession planning, all that is super important. And so you need to keep your people, because it will be cheaper to hire and promote internally. And it will be more efficient because they will likely already have not just the social capital and connections, but the understanding of how you're doing things and where they're going to tap into it internally. Now, coming to the listening part. There are so many, like a lot of what we're going to talk about today. We can talk and sit around and talk about theory and great strategy for days, and we know that strategy is essential. Right. But strategy without, in my perspective, strategy without execution is nothing. And so whilst you're waiting to get your approvals, to put a big strategy in place, to see what works, start small. Start with your HR department. Leverage your line managers. We know now that line managers are critical. They're your little asset. They're your assets. They are managing your people across the organizations. They are your tool to scale. They are your tool to train, and they are your voice. So train them, leverage them, and listening. We know there are so many tools. You can talk about Pecan or all of these great, internal formal tools. Also, I know back in the days we used to say town halls. It's not like this anymore today. You've got team meetings. Surely you've got an internal intranet. Surely you've got moments when you can capture what people think. But I'll say to organizations around on this, these tools and how you're collecting the information is not the most important. What's the most important is employee voice. For people to voice how they are, to help you find solutions, for them to tell you what they want. Mm-hmm. They need to feel safe. Yeah. So, and I think it's always, no matter how we take the question, it always goes back to culture. Create psychological safety. Yes. Ensure that you foster an environment where people are safe and encouraged to speak out against wrong behavior, to speak up, to promote, to say when something's wrong, when they have an idea, to not be scared of failure. Of course, there are organizations where failure is more costly than others, right? Mm-hmm. If I mess up with one client delivering an L&D program, there is probably a lighter risk than if you're piloting an airplane with 600 passengers, right? Yeah. So we have to understand risk appetite based on that. But still, there are so many ways in which your employees will contribute to you if they feel that it's safe to make a mistake, it's safe to fail, it's okay. And I think just that culture of perfection, that culture of, or even top-down hierarchy where everything is tooled down to you and you're not heard, no matter what tools you're putting in place and expensive consultants you're hiring, it will not land if you really don't focus on that human element.
Well, even sending out the email to say, here's the challenge we're having with this plane, and I'm opening it up to everybody, and you listen to what those people were saying. So to take it a different level, not the so-called formal, and we get these tools, and they got a bunch of tools out now, we can do these kind of things, but something as simple as people feeling free to make a contribution. So you mentioned psychological safety. We have to create that in the teams. So I heard an interview on CNBC, and they asked the CEO about his R&D department, and his response was, they asked how many people he had. He says he has 12 to 1,300 people. And the interviewer was kind of stumped because he said, you have that large of a department? You're not that large of a company. He said, no, everyone that works in the company is a part of R&D. If you can figure out a better way to do it, let someone know, because we're all looking for ideas. All the ideas doesn't reside in the so-called C-suite. And I said, you nailed it. And that's the same concept, because they were trying to figure this out. They didn't call in the so-called big shots who's going to charge them a ton of money. They sent out an email, and someone came up with an idea of something they've been struggling with. But that depends upon the culture that's created from on high. The cultural part, the CEO and the leadership team drives the culture. One other key point I wanted to tag into what you were just talking about. Korn Ferry says that 70% of the effectiveness of any team starts from the relationship that the manager creates, line managers, as you said, with that team. And that's an important part. But every time we think of leadership development, we go to the big shots and we start concentrating on those people. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think you're making such a good point. So we know from research, both CIPDs and the Center for Creative Leadership and many others, that less than 40% of line managers get any formal training. And I'm sure all of you here have a similar experience. You've started somewhere junior, and the way to grow is year after year, suddenly you're given one person, 2 people, 3 people, 10 people, and you may never have gotten a management training. You'll have gotten training for some of your skills, but no management training. And you're very often not even given the time or resources to look after your people. So we know many line managers will be asked to look after an entire team, but also still have the same workload as though they didn't have that, when in reality, they should spend time with their teams, right? So that's an issue. And yesterday, we had about 150 people in the room. We're talking just about that topic. We asked for a raise of hands, who in the room, and again, it was leading organizations, international, etc., who in the room is satisfied with the way succession planning is done in their organization? One person raised their hand. One person raised their hand, right? And then we asked, all right, we were talking about this very important topic of leadership development across the organization. All right, forget succession planning as a formal process or even identifying talent. Currently, do you have any undergoing programs to train your line managers or future line managers? We had 10 people raise their hand. So you see, I think that's where it goes back. And every single time we talk to HR, it's about how can HR make a difference? You can drive the conversation. You can drive the policies and practices. You can drive through having a very evidence-based and analytics-driven narrative. You can sell, and you have to. One of our fellows always is that expression says HR have to become marketeers. They have to market the value of human capital to the rest of the organization. So yes, there is that part, but also HR alone, like any department alone, are not going to do much. No. And that's what you're talking, and that, we could go into a whole debate for that. But does it come from the top or does it come from the bottom? For sure, you need the leadership team, the visible leaders to walk the talk when it comes to culture, when it comes to policy that you want people to take up. But also, you need to leverage all your line managers. If you're one company with a headquarters with X amount of branches across the country, those driving you are not your HR team. Very effectively, your line manager. So I think it's really about leadership development. There's formal and informal ways to do it. Again, there are always solutions that don't cost millions. And I want to say this because every time the objection to the solution that we propose is say, well, I don't have the budget right now, etc. No, it's about the culture, the behaviors that you're promoting or condemning. That's very, very important. What is tolerated around here? What is encouraged around here? And then it's about, it could be an informal or formal mentorship program, or it could be a badging program or a sponsorship program. You're matching people up across your organization. You don't have to hire big expensive external stakeholders. And formal training goes one way, but there are so many tools right now. You can go for online learning. You have your LinkedIn learning. I mean, I think there is no barrier to accessing knowledge. It's how you're shaping it and how you're communicating to your people internally.
Well, my response to a C-suite that would tell me that about budgeting and all those things, and my response will always come back to say, are you investing in your workforce? Do you see it as an investment, or do you see it as an expense? Because if you see it as an expense, you're on the wrong track. But the way that we move this going forward is that we invest in our workforce, and that workforce will give us the ROI we need to capture whatever it is that we need as we move along this this journey. Let me just do a call out to some people that are online. Now, Namdi, a good friend of mine, he says he's glad to be here. My friend Turkey says interesting and very enjoyable conversation. And we have a user from a LinkedIn user, not identified, from Toronto, that he's hearing some of the same things there. And my good friend DC Marshall says, may we know the name of the guest. So, Charlotte, give us a quick overview of who you are. It's on the screen, but DC is saying, who is this? Who is this expert here talking?
I don't know if I'm an expert, but I do talk to a lot of people and gather insights. My name is Charlotte Chedeville. I'm the acting regional director for the MENA region at the CIPD, which is the Chartered Institute for Personal and Development. We train and develop HR professionals and qualify people across the organizations. Prior to this, I used to work in diversity and inclusion, where I was heading up the largest diversity and inclusion forum in the MENA region. I've had the pleasure of working with some great minds and thinkers. And I'm very, very happy to be here with Ron, whom we go a very long time back.
way back.
As a trainer about 8 years ago or so. So yeah.
Yeah, so it's good to you here. So DC's specialty is D&I. So let's switch to D&I before we go on a break. I know you're a proponent of DEI. Why is that important today? Business case, when we're talking about trust, psychological safety, let's take on the elephant in the room, DEI, which is bubble to the top. And now that's a huge initiative for organizations. I think a lot of it just window dressing, they say the right things, they do the right things, but upon investigation, you'll find out it's kind of one of those, it's kind of just, we're saying all the right things, we're singing the right tunes. Give us your thoughts on DEI from a business case perspective, why it's not just a feel good, but it's something that business is going to have to, they're going to have to explore that journey in order to build up better revenue, better product, or alignment, or whatever it is.
Ron, it's great. When I first heard of diversity and inclusion about 7 years ago, I was new to this space, and I saw an entire forum dedicated to diversity and inclusion. We had Sherry Blair, Sheryl Sandberg, global leaders, regional leaders, and genuinely, it was the first time I came across this, and I thought naively at the time, wait, really, we need that now? Do we still need to talk about this? Do we need to convince people of that? Now I understand, even though we're so many years down the line and we're in 2022, that unfortunately DEI is still seen as a good to have, like is wellness or mental health. It's still seen as a fluffy thing.
Cool. Yeah.
So we know from research, so from McKinsey research, that first of all, businesses that are diverse fare better in times of crisis, right? We know this. We've learned this in 2008 and 2009. All of the companies the top companies who fared better after the financial crisis all had at least a female on their board and racial diversity on their board, right? The second thing that we know is that having a diverse and inclusive workplace will not only get you better talent that you can tap into and better insights, but will get you closer to your customers. I don't think today a brand can say that their customer base is not diverse, so that they don't aspire to burden the customer base. The third thing, which is back to the importance of people, right? Is I guess at this point today we're seeing it. We've seen 2-3 years ago, we've seen George Floyd's murder that shook America, that brought back the top, not just America, around the world, that brought back the issue of racial diversity. Again, today, we're still having the topics around gender diversity. We're still seeing that we're implementing quotas, and then we are saying, well, now we don't want this one and done approach where we're putting one woman on a board and then that is it. And the reason why this is not good for business is because you're missing out on customers. You are not necessarily designing the right products. We know, I guess for racial diversity, we know that the African-American market is over $1 trillion. So I don't know a single CEO who will say they don't care for tapping into $1 trillion market. There are so many other resources that I will encourage you to look at, and perhaps we can drop them down after the chat. So I guess that's for the business case. I guess the question is, where are we today? And that's to your point of, so to say, greenwashing. At times of heightened pressure, every single time across organizations and societies, people from minority backgrounds or from who are in minority representation are hit the most. We saw it with COVID in terms of patient, and we saw it with employees. A huge fallout. The largest amount of employees that was lost were women who fell out of the workforce all around the world. That's not a Middle East thing. In developed nations, because the mental charge came back on them. You have the kids at home because there is so much happening, because women are still carrying a lot of that weight, and because employers are not offering enough flexibility to cater to their entire workforce, including women. So that came back to that rose again to the top of organization's agenda. And we have to be honest here, very often D&I is approached like merely disguised CSR. It's very good free advertising, unfortunately, right? So you'll see this big, bold PR statements about wanting to attract diverse talent, or very recently, I'm sure you will have seen the Goldman Sachs offering unlimited leave to their senior staff, right? So you very often will have big and bold PR announcements that are maybe significative of a genuine want, but are not followed up on. And so you could say some people operate, or organizations operate in bad faith. You could also say the commitment isn't really there yet. And very often, I think organizations, large enough organizations, are bipolar. You have the marketing department, you have the communications department, and you will think of your customers, and you will design size inclusive wardrobe, or you will cater to a diverse customer base. And these are the people who are coming up with great solutions orientated to customers. And then very separately, somewhere else in the organization, you've got people looking after people. And unfortunately, these two do not add up. So you're seeing this dichotomy, and a lot of the employees will then say, well, I saw all of that big external communication. What about us, right? So I think it's really important to commitment from the top when it comes to diversity, inclusion, and equity is essential to get that buy-in. And I then think you have to be very careful about how you're going about first investigating where we are as organizations, whether your reporting is public or not. You have to dig, and you will find data that is not necessarily appealing, that doesn't make you happy, that the organization isn't proud of. And we have to be very careful. That investigation work is really, really important to know where you're starting, and then having a reasonable timeline. You do not change a company's reputation, whether you're seeking to attract diverse talent or whether you're seeking to, you do not change it overnight. So you can't have a 6-month goal. That would be very, very short-sighted. It's like if you're entering a new market tomorrow where your competitor has the majority of the market share, you will make a business plan that takes that into account and give it enough time. So I think that, and then ensuring that you always have an executive sponsor no matter what you're doing. Diversity, equity, and inclusion very often falls back on the shoulders of somebody randomly in the organization. And we saw with COVID, the largest ever amount of formal D&I roles being created. And then the tenure is less than 2 years. Why? Because again, you're lacking the commitment. So you're putting somebody directly reporting to the CEO with a great remit, somebody who's passionate and knowledgeable and has the right skills, but they don't have the internal influence, and they don't have a true, genuine commitment from the leadership. So it doesn't matter who you're putting up in that role, you will not drive change if it is an isolated initiative.
Well, you know, I saw some interesting stats relating to turnover in the so-called DEI space, and it's huge because you talked about having access, being a part of that executive committee or whatever it would be called, depending upon your org structure. So we do the window dressing, and we make the big announcement, and that person, in a lot of cases, may not have a budget. They may not have access to the so-called leadership team, which looks totally different. So I say that companies are putting out, it's more PR driven. And, you know, they put out these statements, and I called one CEO out who I know has a track record of not being inclusive, and made this huge statement about all the things that they were going to do. And I called her out on the sidelines, and I said, you know what? We've interacted before. I've seen the way that you've done things. You have never done this before. And now you create a statement, and all of the people are coming in and say, oh my God, this is great. so glad you exposed all these kind of things. And I said, you don't have a track record in doing this. So tell me how you're going to proceed and change your MO. She did not even respond. So I'm thinking if I was a senior executive, and I'm talking to you as another senior executive, and I'm pointing out flaws, I would probably want to get some insight from that, and just totally ignored me and my statement and my insight as a result of that. So that told me right away that you're saying one thing and you're probably doing something else because your track record is different. So CEO level commitment, board commitment, all of these things are important. I give you an example of I live in the Bergman area in Dubai, and when they were kind of redoing Bergman Mall, they were putting in this drugstore, and they had the whole screen, the advert screen, as to a customer frolicking on the beach in UAE. The people the family that they had in the ad had no resemblance to the UAE. And the marketing company, I think, was probably out of the UK and had UK kind of family there. And I'm thinking, totally clueless. And you see it all the time now, but I'm glad that people like us are calling these things out. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I had to kind of get that off my chest. So how would you advise organizations? Should that be from CEO driven, or should we have marketing? Should we have every department chiming in and kind of putting that strategy together? It's kind of like, do we go back and send out the email, say we're having a problem with an engine, and our people bring it forward to possibly bring a solution, as opposed to a C-suite kind of strategy and we don't execute? That's kind of a long-winded.
Yeah, I don't have the whole solution. If I did, I would be somewhere else right now.
It'd be done, right?
Yes. What I can say is, first of all, diversity, equity, and inclusion is a very personal topic to many of your employees. Many of your employees will have lived, whether within or outside the organization, they will have experienced discrimination. They will have experienced bullying. They will have feelings of rejection. So to many of your stakeholders, internal and external, that's a very sensitive issue. And we shouldn't discount that. And so I say this because whether you're making a big external announcement, or whether you're going to, which I think is usually a good idea, to go in and ask your people about what they think, you need to be mindful that you need to be ready for what you're going to hear. And it goes back to the idea, right? So it's not specific and only to that and unique to D&I, but you start with employee listening. Employees will never open up about their own experiences, all their recommendations, without a culture that is safe, especially when it comes to this. So that's the first thing, if you want to go down the route of employee listening. And if you do go down the route of employee listening, you are setting expectations that you are on the way to sort this out. You can't just open the Pandora box and then not address it. I think that's just one thing that I'm sick of seeing a lot of organizations getting stuck in that. I think the part of executive and ownership. So diversity and inclusion being being part of, it should be part of the culture, right? You want to create an inclusive workplace. Whether I'm sitting down or to the top, it needs to trickle down. Every single behavior, anyone's emails or behavior, means you are sending a signal that exclusive behavior will not be tolerated, that we promote inclusion. And not just that, but we're actively also trying, depending on where you are at, whether you're, inclusion is always a bigger, difficult part, inclusion and belonging, but also don't forget, you may also still be looking at your recruitment or attracting diverse talent. Now, it's a chicken and the egg. If you don't have a diverse workforce, you don't have a reputation to be an exclusive workforce, you can go all you want and try to attract diverse talent. It has to be worked in combination. When it comes to ownership, such initiatives must be directed and owned at the top. It can't just sit with the board. The board is an executive. The CEO, it could be the CEO, or it could be the COO or the CMO, depending on your organization, or CTO, whatever. You need an executive sponsor who is accountable to the board to drive this organization. That's what we often see, right? Then in terms of doing, of course, it has to be beyond HR. and you know, we've done a lot of work at the CIPD around diversity and inclusion, including internally. You can go and look at your policies, how you're promoting people and hiring people. But I'm going to need my marketing department to be aligned with what we're saying, and I'm going to need my line managers to trickle down this. So usually, and that's not specific to D&I, if it's sitting everywhere, it's sitting nowhere. So I think you need to have one person who's driving the initiative, who is sitting above all of the other services. But now I want to say, many of the people joining us today probably don't have the power or the remit to hire such a position, right? Yeah. Create a position. So this is really important to talk about and to continue to advocate for business leaders. And I think the market is putting a lot of pressure. This is what happened with George Floyd, right? It was the market that put pressure on companies. It was the market and external stakeholders, to the point that organizations had to say or do something. So I think the business case is becoming clearer and clearer. Yeah. The execution, you can start with your start with your values, start with your interviews, start with your training, encouraging people to understand what it means to be inclusive, what it means to conduct a review that is a two-way conversation. How can I get rid of unconscious bias? These are training, these are education, this is awareness, this is things that you can start to drive change from the bottom up until the point that I think we get to as a stage where we all have diversity and inclusion. And I want to say, if you guys need some reports or resources, I'm sure we'll get them to you afterwards. We've got tons of it. I don't think this conversation should just be fact dumping or fact sheets. There are so many tools for us to look at. But I guess today we're just talking about these topics that are just so important.
Yeah. So let's take a quick break, and then we'll come right back to close out. Thank you.
Thank you.
At Strategy Focused Group, we not only upskill, we inspire, enable, educate, discuss, innovate, motivate, challenge, let us help you elevate your team. Email us at info@strategyfocusedgroup.com.
So as we begin to close out, I wanted to ask you, you had a group of the top leaders in the UAE, all the big brands that were there. What were some common themes that everyone kind of walked away with at the end of that session?
Around the future of work?
Yeah, around the future of work. And what was the kind of things that everyone kind of agreed on, or how we're going to move forward, those kinds of insights?
Yeah, I think a lot of the themes that we've already discussed, right? But I think the idea of agility as business leaders is critically important. We're talking about how do we iterate our planning processes? How do we ensure that we are being future fit? A related theme is that of skills. We've talked a little bit about leadership skills, and we see that the skills that are needed today are not that of tomorrow, and that we're unable to predict the future. So the best way that we can prepare ourselves is to equip ourselves and promote, those a certain set of skills, which is not the competencies, the core competencies, it's behaviors, it's higher for attitude. A lot of people said that in the room, and I think a lot of when we asked them what did you wish you knew at the very beginning of your career, two of the top skills that came up was networking inside and outside the organization, very interestingly, and emotional intelligence. It wasn't anything else that they thought really, really helped them advance a career if you kind of move forward. So I think the question of skill and of reskilling, we've seen businesses as whole completely transformed overnight with COVID. And that's taught us that we're able to be agile. And that's also forced so many of us in HR professionals and everybody, we moved to virtual, we've moved our products and services. So be able to, we've had to reskill, and thinking that we don't, let us take this forward and not wait for another crisis to reskill, but rather create a kind of culture of continuous learning. The parallel between the employee relationship and the employee experience and the experience of customers, it really keeps coming up as we're making the case for human-centric leadership. And I think really just the future of work is human. We're talking about digital transformation. We're talking about responsible business. And digital skills. I think we've moved past the point where we thought robots were going to replace us. We know now that they're going to enhance us, that actually technology is going to help us do our best job and add value where we do, and that the future of work is human, and that means putting our people first. So I really think that. And finally, the question of line managers. I think we don't talk about it enough. We don't think about it enough. The question of all these people who are just they're across the organization. They're your voice. They're managing your people. They're the ones who are delivering the experience for your people. And we know, like I shared some examples earlier, right? We know we don't necessarily get this right. We don't spend enough trying to understand our people. And that's in such a fast-changing world, that could be difficult. And finally, the question of hybrid working. And I would love to hear if anybody, even after this session, wants to let us know how they're doing, how they're going about this hybrid working or this flexible working, what they're offering. I'd love to hear insights. That's part of the whole EVP piece, which you mentioned in the beginning, Ron.
Okay, cool. Can you give us your I know the website. What is the website for CIPD?
Yeah.
I mean,
so
I know.
Yeah, I think it's appearing right down below. But so if you're based in Europe or the rest of the world, the United States, you can go to cipd.co.uk. That's where we're headquartered. If you're in the MENA region, we'd love to hear from you on cipd.ae. And we're very, very active on the social media. The CIPD is set up as a charity where we develop people. We do have training courses and work with employers to enhance their workforces and enhance their people management. But also we do a lot of research. We issue about 40 reports a year on the world of work, anything from diversity and inclusion to flexibility to technology, which I think are great resources if any of you is curious.
Oh my goodness. Charlotte, thank you for being a guest on the show today and bringing all this insight to our audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ron. And I want to say thank you so much for the incredible work that you're doing and this series. It's so well put together. So really happy to be here.
Thank you. Stay online and as we close out.